The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Welcome to the David Pakman Show, day 2 from our new New York City headquarters. We will be talking about the fast food strikes coming up. I just walked by one of them, literally just blocks from David Pakman headquarters. I'm joined by producer Louis Motamedi in the Austin, Texas bureau of the David Pakman Show. Louis, how's the weather there today?
I haven't been outside yet, actually. I'm not really sure, but the past couple days have been pretty nice.
Yeah, the weather seems to change very quickly there. Let's get right into it. The Fort Hood shooter, Nidal Hasan, has been sentenced to death. Of course, Nidal Hasan is the United States Army Medical Corps officer, a psychiatrist, who fatally shot and killed 13 people, injuring more than 30 others back in November of 2009. At the initial court martial, he admitted to the shootings, and a jury panel of 13 officers convicted him on 13 counts and has now unanimously recommended that he be sentenced to death. This is the worst mass murder at a military installation in U.S. history. And Hasan is turning 43 next month because of the shots that he sustained from military police in the course of the day of shooting. He is now paralyzed from the waist down and is in a wheelchair, and he has been sentenced to death. Now, Louis, let's discuss this a little bit. I am against the death penalty, as most of our audience may know if they've been following this program for any length of time. I believe that it is barbaric for the government to decide to kill people. I believe that even perfectly executed, the death penalty is antiquated and just a kind of recalcitrant, irrelevant, and not really modern way of handling justice. And we know that it is often not executed properly. We have had at least a couple of innocent people who we know were executed, and we've had many people exonerated from death row who were initially sentenced to death. So putting that aside, Louis, isn't it a worse punishment for Nidal Hasan to spend the rest of his life in prison? He is now wheelchair bound and paralyzed, and he wanted to be a martyr, and keeping him alive seems to me like a far worse punishment. Not that that's how we should decide, but the premise of the death penalty is that it is reserved for the worst crimes, and it is the worst punishment.
Also, when it's a military tribunal or whatever they're called, death penalty usually, I think, is a bit more common when things like this go down, even though it's very rare, of course.
Yeah, it can be more common, but I don't know if you know this, that in military cases, when there is a death penalty conviction sentence, there are several mandatory appeal stages, and that every military death sentence requires final approval from the president. So this is going to be a very long thing. Even with the death penalty sentence, he may never actually be executed.
Well, from what I understand, he wants to be executed. He defended himself. He actually gave no defense at all intentionally, and he wants to die.
See, there's conflict on that because his attorney has said he doesn't have a death wish, but at the same time, he sees himself as a martyr, and the way to be fully martyred would be to be killed, right?
That seems to be it, and that seems to be common among people of his mindset. There's another part of this, and that is being paralyzed. You require so much extra care and money when you are being held, right? When you're in prison for the rest of your life in a condition like that. And I don't know. That's another way to look at it. The fiscal aspect.
Right. He would take pleasure in draining the system even more by remaining alive. There's so many complicated issues, but what I get back down to always is that I am against the death penalty, and the death penalty should be abolished, as it is in more and more U.S. states. There is a huge strike going on among fast food workers. Today is the big walkout day. This is a year-long campaign. Employees of McDonald's, Wendy's, Burger King, and a bunch of others have pledged to walk out on their jobs today in more than 50 cities, from Boston all the way to California. I was just downstairs near the studio, Louis. I walked by the local Wendy's in Financial District, Manhattan, It is complete chaos. It is unbelievable. You can barely walk by on the sidewalk. I ended up having to walk in the street, which of course NYPD told me not to do, but there's no room on the sidewalk to walk. There were probably 10 or 12 different news interviews going on, drums cheering. If I were planning to go to Wendy's today, if I saw that, I probably wouldn't. So even if that particular Wendy's still has enough employees to operate, I have to assume that the amount of business they're getting is way down. And aside from this being a good thing for workers' rights, the point of the strike is for increased wages, that it might have a positive effect in terms of health, because somebody who was going to get themselves their fast food maybe is skipping it today.
Yeah, look, I admire what's going on here, and I think because of the technology we have, it's easier to do, but easier to organize, I should say, organize these strikes. But it's not going to work unless every employee from every Wendy's leaves on the same day, and I just don't see that happening. I don't see it happening on that level with any of these fast food restaurants, unfortunately. I'm totally in support of what they're doing, though.
Well, as a first step, this may prove to actually have a financial impact, even if a couple of major stores, like if the financial district New York City Wendy's, which I don't know what it makes, but it's a ton of money, if they can't really make money today, that actually is a big deal, because of the way budgets are set for these stores. You've got to perform every single day, and it could have a serious impact. Is it going to change the fact that fast food restaurants pay terrible wages? No, it's not going to change that. The other thing that I think about as I walk around is, why do people go to fast food? If you live in a place, if you work or live in a place like where our studio is, down lower Manhattan, you walk outside. I understand people say, well, fast food is cheap. But hold on a second. You've got the little carts on the sidewalk with cheap and much better food than fast food. You've got the food trucks. You've got sandwich shops. You have everything. There are hundreds of restaurants and places to get food, many of them about as inexpensive as fast food. Why do you go to Wendy's? Why do you go to McDonald's? As you know, Louis, I'm known mostly for not having been to McDonald's for, at this point, it's been something like 15 years. It's kind of my claim to fame. I just don't get why you would end up at a Wendy's in a place like this.
I know it's hard for you to imagine, and it was very hard for me to imagine. Putting yourself in this mindset is almost impossible for people like us who enjoy quality food. But there are people who would literally rather have McDonald's, Burger King, Wendy's than anything else in the world. They love it that much. They think it's great. It's inexpensive, and they're addicted to it. And they literally consider that the best option for any meal.
Really interesting clip from Brian Fisher, which gives us some insight into kind of the psyche and the underlying premise to much of the religious-based fear-mongering and lack of separation of church and state that's desired by individuals like Brian Fisher and groups like his group, the American Family Association. Take a look at what Brian Fisher said on his program.
You want to understand why people seem so clueless? We talk every day for 2 hours about how clueless people on the left are. Why is that? Because they do not have the fear of the Lord. You can't be clued in, you can't be discerning, you can't be perceptive, you can't be wise unless you begin with a holy reverence for God.
All right, so Louis, liberals can't be wise because they don't fear the Lord. This is fascinating to me because this really outlines the mindset for a lot of the compliance fear-mongering that exists in the religious community. In other words, you must be afraid. You must be afraid in order to act morally. You must be afraid in order to be good. You must act out of fear. And what's the most compelling aspect of this, Louis, to me, is that we know that in just about any other aspect of life, making decisions out of fear, operating out of fear, leads to bad decisions. It leads to irrational decisions. It doesn't lead to productivity. It doesn't lead to anything good. So why is it that while in every other avenue of life, you want to avoid acting out of fear? And as we know, even basic depression is often just based in fear. Anxiety is almost always based in fear. Why do you need to fear God in order to be a good person?
Yeah, it's fascinating. I mean, at the root of it, in the case of Christianity, it's fear as a form of control.
Right.
And like you said, like we talked about yesterday, fear as a form of control is exactly what's happening in countless Middle Eastern countries with regard to Sharia law. And it's the exact same thing. I guess Brian Fisher just isn't wise enough to see that.
There is absolutely no difference between Christian and conservative use of fear to control and coerce in the United States and the Sharia law version of fear that is used to control and coerce in other parts of the world. The Christians who are using it here are actually using fear-mongering about, in many cases, Islam, although really they are both based in the same type of fear-mongering. And as you said, Lewis, the Republican Party uses fear-mongering when it comes to trying to get the vote out. President Obama is going to take away your guns. Obamacare is going to be death panels. Obamacare is going to destroy doctors' jobs, and there won't be any doctors anymore. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. And this is yet another area in which we don't like the two-party system. We know that Democrats are almost as corrupt as Republicans, but Republicans in bed with Christianity and kind of the right-wing religious movement use fear-mongering exponentially more than do mainstream American Democrats. And this is a perfect example of where it comes from. You can't be wise unless you fear God. A Fox News medical expert, David Samadi, went on Fox and Friends and, as usual, made all sorts of outrageous claims. In this particular case, it's, hey, women have got breasts, women go to the doctor more, so they should pay more for health care than men do, and that's a big problem with Obamacare. Watch this.
Dr. Samadi, women should pay more?
Look, it's not biased. I'm not saying this as a man, but I think that they are using the system a lot more than we are. So they go through a lot of preventive screening. They give birth. They have the whole mammogram, pap smears. Guys, we don't like to go to doctors, right? 70% of healthcare decisions are made by women. In my own practice, I see that it's the women that bring the guys and say, go get screened. Otherwise, you and I were never going to go to them.
Amazing, Lewis. Part of the reason that a doctor is saying women should pay more is that men don't like going to the doctor. This makes no sense to me. So if I understand correctly, men being irresponsible when it comes to their personal health care and physical care and mental care in many cases, also reticent to seek mental health, that means that women should be paying more. This is one of the most bizarre Fox and Friends so-called guest experts that we've come across. It's not as obviously absurd as the woman who smelled God that we talked about, but this makes no sense, and it's being passed off as news.
Yeah, of all the shows on Fox, this one is definitely the most bizarre and has the most outrageous, the people making the most outrageous claims. This one, I mean, every time we think we've topped them, Fox and Friends have topped themselves, they set the bar even higher.
Yeah.
And this guy takes it to a new level.
On today's bonus show, we'll be talking about the Air Force banning a certain Chobani yogurt flavor. We'll talk about a Texas chupacabra and also PETA, chicken wings, and penis size. You're not going to want to miss this bonus show. What is the bonus show? After this show ends, there's a whole other show. It's hosted and produced by producer Louis Motamedi. I'm the sidekick on that show. It is one of the many member benefits that you get for supporting an alternative to corporate media. It's very easy to sign up, davidpakman.com/membership. You could be a member 30 seconds from now. Think about that.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
Great to have you with us today. Our membership program is made possible in part by liberalbias.com. When reality just doesn't live up to right-wing ideals, there's only one possible explanation. Reality itself suffers from liberal bias. Find out more at liberalbias.com. Today's new member of the day is Anita. I don't know if the last name is pronounced Kreenan or Krishnan. There's a J in there, Lewis, but my instinct tells me the J might be silent. But in any case, Anita Krishnan, Anita Kreenan, thank you for being a David Pakman Show member. You too can have your last name mispronounced on the show. Go to davidpakman.com/membership to sign up today. I saw a really deceptive headline the other day on CNN, and I'll tell you what the headline is, and then we'll talk about it. The headline is, Police, 8-year-old shoots, kills elderly caregiver after playing video game. And what the story is about an 8-year-old in Louisiana who intentionally shot and killed a woman that was initially identified just as his elderly caregiver, and later is said to be actually the boy's grandmother. The game that was played was Grand Theft Auto, and the article goes on to talk about how the video game is partly to blame for the child being violent, and talks about how the gun actually belonged to the grandmother. Marie Smothers is her name, who is also the caregiver. And I encourage you to read the article. If you just look on CNN, Police, 8-year-old shoots, kills elderly caregiver after playing video game. I have so many problems with the way this is being reported, but mainstream, actually I take that back. We're not using that term anymore. Corporate media, once again, fails at reporting the actual problem, which is really bad parenting, which consists of allowing an 8-year-old to play a game that is rated mature, which is Grand Theft Auto, and giving the boy access to a gun, and number 3, blaming video games for real-world violence, which we've seen debunked time and time again. The game alone would not make anybody kill people, right? I mean, I play very few games, Lewis, as you know, but over time, I've played most of the different Grand Theft Auto games. And the problem is not the game. In other words, the game, to somebody who is parented normally and doesn't have access to guns and so on and so forth, getting a game rated mature when you reach the age at which those games are allowed is not going to make you kill anyone. And even further, the claims that people who do killings or commit crimes, violent crimes, are obsessed with violent movies or video games, that doesn't mean those movies or video games are causing the violence. It means that because they are already fixated on violence, they are drawn to those games. And we've talked to academic experts about this. We had Professor Erica Schar from the University of Massachusetts on the show. And time again, Lewis, video games being blamed when, why does the kid have this game? It's rated mature. Why does the kid have access to the gun? Those are really the issues here.
Right. I think that's the real story here is the gun. First of all, Darwin Award for the caregiver. Just about any time you get killed by your own gun while it's in your own house by a child, you get a Darwin Award. Complete incompetence, another negligent gun owner. And study after study shows that what you said is correct. Video games do not make people violent. It's plain and simple.
The Pope has criminalized the reporting of sex crimes. You might remember a couple of weeks ago I came to you and I said, hey, great news, even if it's just a show, a public show for posturing, the Pope has said that child molestation on Vatican grounds is now illegal. It's against the law. We were, of course, surprised that it was 2013 when that declaration was made, but okay, putting that aside, it was a positive thing. We now are getting a closer look at the letter of a lot of those laws that were recently passed by the Pope, rules with regard to sex crimes, and it turns out that the Pope has actually made it illegal to report sex crimes against children. The way it works is that according to the new laws, if you reveal or receive confidential Vatican information, you can now be punished by up to 2 years in prison. Of course, those newly defined sex crimes do carry sentences of up to 12 years, but because all of those sex crimes are kept confidential, it is no longer legal. There is no longer a legal way for Vatican officials to report sex crimes. Why, Lewis? Because they're secret. The exact same logic that is used with regard to some FOIA, Freedom of Information Act requests and NSA surveillance data, which is, hey, if the data was collected secretly, then we don't have to give you access or even tell you that we have that data about you. Same thing, very similar thing here, which is it's illegal to do a lot of these acts, but knowing about that is actually completely confidential and secret, and to talk about it, to report that, would actually be illegal. So, Louis, we thought it was something good initially, and it turns out that it is yet another way for the Catholic Church to shield and protect child molesters.
Yeah, I said originally it was just basically a PR stunt, and that's what it turned out to be. This is just more of the same from the church. This is what we come to expect, and I don't know what else to add to that.
Fabrizio Perona of Italy's La Repubblica newspaper says they know exactly what they are doing. They just thought nobody would notice. The church wants to impress the world by getting tough on sex crimes, but they criminalized leaks, which is the only way anybody could ever discover their crimes. It's genius if you stop and think about it. There is no question that there is genius involved here. Absolutely. I came to you last week with an unfortunate story about a Mexican leader, a woman, who said gays can't marry because they don't face each other during sex. We don't have to rehash that entire story, but check it out in our archives if you're curious about it. I am glad to now come to you with a positive story. Not only is it a positive story about gay rights, not only is it a positive story about gay rights from Mexico, it is also a positive story about gay rights from the Catholic Church. A Mexican Catholic bishop, Jose Raul Vera Lopez, says that homophobia is a mental illness. I love this. Let's take a look at the video. I'll just play a little bit of it. It is in Spanish, and then I'll sum up kind of the gist of the entire interview.
Son seres humanos, son dignos de respeto. Y el Santo Padre sabe que seguramente que sabe, porque muchos en la iglesia no quieren reconocer la verdad científica sobre el tema de la homosexualidad. Se quieren quedar en que la homosexualidad es una forma de perversión humana, es una enfermedad. Todo eso ya no existe científicamente hablando.
All right, so I think that this is fantastic, Louis. He says, why would I immediately think a gay or lesbian person is perverse or depraved the moment they approach me? That's how people who are homophobic react. It's a mental illness in which you see gays as depraved and promiscuous. You have to be sick in the head for that. I've been saying this for years. It's fantastic that a Catholic bishop is saying this. It's great that a Mexican Catholic is saying this. And it's great that someone who probably is getting a lot of pressure from higher-ups in the Catholic Church to stop saying these things. He's absolutely right. He's received death threats for being outspoken and saying homophobia is a mental illness. And this is one of the good guys, Louis, and it is sad that they are basically outcasts within the Catholic Church.
But at least they themselves have followings and people who listen to and trust them. So, hey, at least there are some of them.
Absolutely. And as you remember, very often when we've actually had a number of positive stories about Catholics lately to report, which go against the predatory child sex abuse stuff, it goes against the homophobia stuff. Just a couple of weeks ago, I told you about Sister Simone Campbell, who asked the government, why don't you help poor people? Let's do more to help poor people, and was ridiculed by Republican Congressman Reed Pibble. And as we see here, the bishop, Mr. Lopez, also an outcast, received death threats for this, but they're doing the right thing. They recognize that they are acting in a way that makes sense. They are doing what they know to be right. Isn't this really the Christian thing to do, Louis?
Of course, if you ask me, but am I an expert, David? No, I'm just a guy with some common sense.
I want to remind our audience that we're trying to get our donate your account status back up. For a while, we were in the top 5 shows on donate your account. If you don't know what donate your account is, it's this very cool online tool that allows our audience to donate either a Twitter retweet or a Facebook share to the show. You control how often we can retweet or reshare messages through your account. We only use it to send out videos from the David Pakman Show. And, you know, there's a bunch of people ahead of us. The Young Turks are ahead of us. I think Sam Cedar's ahead of us in Citizen Radio. Help us climb the ranks. Please go to donateyouraccount.com/David Pakman Show. In 10 seconds, you can donate a Twitter retweet or a Facebook share, or hopefully both. We've got close to 300 accounts now, Louis, that are donating one, the other, or both. Help us build it back up. For a while, we were in the top 5. I want to break back into that. So check it out, donateyouraccount.com/David Pakman Show. We've got to talk about Syria, and that's next.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
Let's bring in Dennis Campbell. Dennis is editor-in-chief of UK Progressive Magazine, also host of Worldview with Dennis Campbell at youtube.com/worldview show. Dennis, the Syrian situation is developing quickly. President Obama has said that a decision has not yet been reached, but by many accounts, some kind of military action in Syria is all but a foregone conclusion. The public opinion polls are not particularly thrilled with this, and not that we should always decide foreign policy based on public opinion, but as a point of note, a new Reuters poll shows about 60% of Americans believing that the U.S. should stay out of the conflict, even more negative numbers in the UK. Let's start with what exactly are the reasons on the table for the UK-U.S. consideration of military action right now?
Well, both governments seem to think rather conclusively that there is evidence. There's been some argument today in the House of Commons here that that evidence was indeed supplied by Israeli Mossad, that indeed chemical weapons were used by Assad on his own people. We've heard the number 14 times, bandied about several times. But the most significant is on the 21st of August, just a little over a week ago, there was an attack using some sort of a chemical agent that killed almost 1,000 people. And it has raised a lot of very interesting questions on all sorts of sides of this as to where does one go if indeed this information is untrue. I heard George Galloway, who's a very fiery member of Parliament, say, well, why would he use the opportunity knowing that the UN inspectors were there in Damascus, in Syria, to actually launch a chemical attack when that's what they're there to try and find evidence of. Some are saying that he's completely insane, and others have compared this to the series of action-reaction that led up to the disaster that we know as World War I, which is about to have its centenary here. So, and of course, all of the references go back to what happened in 2003 when weapons of mass destruction were not discovered in Iraq, and that, of course, led to the war on the basis of the search for weapons of mass destruction.
It's unlikely that the UN Security Council will end up approving action, in particular because Russia has a vote there and can veto approval and likely will. That being said, that's not stopped the U.S. and some of its allies from carrying missions forward in the past. One of the issues I'm seeing, Dennis, is that chemical weapons alone may or may not be the correct red line for whether to use military force. And the problem is that even the most successful campaign of cruise missile strikes would not destroy all of Syria's chemical weapons. So then we have to start evaluating, well, let's assume you can get some of them, but not all. What are the implications after whatever strike takes place? That seems to be the most complicated issue. Whether or not you believe in using force and whether or not you believe it is justified here. What happens afterwards?
Well, that's the that's the real question that's on the table right now. And you've got a situation where there are so many moving parts to this situation that any one of them could go basically upside down at any moment. I mean, we've got a situation where, okay, so we're not going to be targeting, according to the latest administration statements in the United States, as well as the debate that's gone on here in Parliament all day, any of those supply stocks, because there's fear that those stocks would then contaminate people and it could downwind blow and harm other people. But the real issue then becomes, well, how crazy is the leader, Bashar al-Assad of Syria? Is he likely to then turn around and say attack Israel with missiles with gas in them? And you've seen all weekend long Israelis lining up to renew their gas masks. You're seeing all kinds of situations. What you don't know is what will happen afterwards, because you have Iran very publicly now supporting the Assad regime. Indeed, they were called in earlier today by Assad to help and to stop any sort of action or attack. You have Russia claiming that the submarines and ships that are now in the Mediterranean were part of ongoing exercises, yet this morning the announcement was made here that indeed those are going to be there as the U.S. destroyers begin lobbing cruise missiles. You're looking at a very very classic situation where action reaction could lead to a much broader and wider conflict. The other issue you have is a number of commentators I've seen have just said no matter what we do, we are not going to improve our standing in that part of the world. One commentator I read, I think it was in Slate magazine this morning, just said, let it bleed. And as callous as that may sound, that may actually not be the worst situation you could have, because involving us in any form, unless it's going to be meaningful, is not going to work. I mean, we're not going to get this madman to back down. He's clearly capable of using gas on his own people. Just be thankful he's not running the Iranian nuclear program at this point. But if he's in bed with them, anything is indeed possible. So there are no easy answers for President Obama. David Cameron here is seeing his support absolutely splinter and fall apart all afternoon. He's not been in control of the situation for the last 24 hours, and it's starting to show. I think this entire resolution could go down to defeat because a number of the speakers today against this were on his backbench.
And not only that, Dennis, once we even get, let's say we had consensus, let's say we had action, let's say you were even able to take down the Assad regime, the rebels are increasingly fractured, and you have, the Syrian Kurdish bloc, you've got the Sunni Arab bloc, and you have absolutely no confidence right now that even if you take down the Assad regime, that the country will not end up controlled by even more outrageous fundamentalist groups. And this often is the concern. We talked about it in Egypt many times, you and I, which is what happens after and who takes control, and is that any better for the people?
And in 1979, 1980, when the Russians were involved in a horrific struggle inside of Afghanistan, we provided money and arms and support to none other than Osama bin Laden and the Taliban. So our foreign policy in this region of the world, and by ours I mean the United States and the United Kingdom, has been anything but good. I mean, we have done nothing but make situations worse. We've ignored atrocities by Saddam Hussein, by Hosni Mubarak, by Bashar al-Assad, by Ben Ali in Tunisia, at the cost of maintaining the peace in that particular region. And that has come back to bite us 2.5 years ago now during the start of the Arab Spring uprising when we had no seat at the table. Now it's going to bite us even harder that the hardliners have, again, the military hardliners have taken back over in Egypt, and they've sent most of the Arab Spring Revolution movement underground. So it is an absolute quagmire. You can look at the map and you can look at the battles between Sunni and Shia, Saudi Arabia versus Iran in terms of control, political control, economic control, and all it takes is one stupid, hot-headed decision. I mean, who thought that an archduke's murder would cause World War I? We're talking about a potential scale here that could make that look tiny because there are nuclear weapons involved, there are nuclear arsenals involved. We're against Russia and China. There's no way this ends well if we accelerate and get involved.
We've been speaking with Dennis Campbell. He's editor-in-chief of UK Progressive Magazine. And don't miss his show on YouTube, youtube.com/Worldview Show. Stay with us. Next, we've got your voicemails, as always, and plenty more stories.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
A Kentucky man called the police, called 911, and said, I just shot my wife to death. Give me the police. I'm under arrest. This is a Kentucky man who says that his wife asked him to shoot her in order to stop the pain associated with her breast cancer. He says that he had an interview with the jail, at the jail, and this is Ernest Chris Chumbley. He said that he did kill his wife with a .32 handgun after she asked him to stop her pain because she was terminally ill. I said, all I've got is what the doctor gave me for medicine, the pain pills, he recalled. And she said, no, I've taken enough of them. I want you to stop my pain for good. The investigation is ongoing, Lewis, and this is getting people out of the woodwork in a tizzy, saying that this is what we have to look forward to if physician-assisted suicide becomes the norm. I completely disagree. This is actually what we wouldn't need if physician-assisted suicides became the norm. That being said, we don't know that this woman's condition. All we know is this one line from the husband, right? We don't know the exact circumstances. But what we do know, Lewis, is just like the letter I got from a terminally ill viewer last week, that when you don't have the ability, when you don't know in the back of your mind that if it really gets bad, you have the ability to, in what can only be called somewhat of a dignified way, ending the pain, that people do start making decisions that don't make sense. In this case now, assuming that the story is true, leaving her husband potentially facing charges, and that's not a good thing.
Right. When I think about it, I think, maybe there's a better way to do this. She could have OD'd herself. She could have killed herself in other ways that would not make her husband a potential murderer. But I don't know, maybe she was religious and didn't want to actually commit suicide. But you're right. We do know for a fact that she was suffering from a terminal illness. And
well, we don't know that. That's the thing. It hasn't been determined. The details of her breast cancer have not yet been completely determined. We don't yet know that it would be what we would describe as terminal. We don't know that yet. But part of the problem here is that now all we have is the word of the husband who admits to shooting her. We don't know specifically that he had any reason to lie, but this is a horrible situation. Assuming that it is all true, it is terrible that now this is something the husband has to deal with. It's just a horrible situation all around for everyone involved. And the idea that this is the result of physician-assisted suicide is just completely false, and we can't get sucked into these circular nonsense debates that make absolutely no sense.
It's just, the opponents are not always, as we talked about, the religious opponents, although that's the majority of them. We also talked to many doctors ourselves who, for one reason or another, opposed this. And from what we understand, where we came from, it was about 50-50.
That's exactly right. In Massachusetts, it was about 50-50 when it voted. My dad, who is a doctor, said he is on the fence about this. He's not exactly sure. He is definitely not. He's certainly not against it for religious reasons, and he is not strongly against it, but he also is unsure that it is a good thing. And there's another doctor who is a neurologist, actually, Lewis, the dad of a friend of ours, who also is against it. A lot of doctors that we know not in favor. It's a complicated issue, but let's not muddle it by saying we can expect more husbands shooting their wives if there is physician-assisted suicide. Neil Armstrong, the first man on the moon, has died. Neil Armstrong on July 20th, 1969, with 500 million people watching, which at the time was 1/6 of the world's population, stepped on the moon. He was the first person to step on the moon, walking down the ladder of that lunar landing ship Eagle, placing his left foot on the moon's surface and saying that's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind, arguably saying that's one small step for a man, controversially stepped on by some static. As we know, Lewis, now that line completely infamous. This is sad, and it also reminds me that we seem to always have money for wars. We seem to always have money for missiles, but we continue cutting funding to NASA. We continue cutting funding into research and space exploration. I've spoken to Neil deGrasse Tyson about it on this program 2 times, and it is not a good thing. I think we need to be doing more of that. We need to be encouraging that type of research. And also, we talk about the deficit that the U.S. has in terms of engineering and scientific students. And what better way to bring up that area of education and research in the U.S. than to excite people like what John F. Kennedy did, saying we're going to put people on the moon. I think that it is very, very sad that we continue to slide when it comes to solar system and space research and travel. And I think hopefully Neil Armstrong lived a life that encouraged that type of excitement and research and wondering about the possibilities, and his passing hopefully will do more of the same.
It is sad, and I hope that in his memory, people will start thinking about the good that comes out of research and development in in those fields.
Let's go to your voicemails. Our voicemail number is open 24 hours a day. Call anytime. Questions, comments, insults, criticisms, praise, whatever you want. Let's take a listen to one voicemail here, Lewis.
Hi, David. I was just wondering, how would you feel if I committed conspiracy to violate, copyright laws, and I created the David Bagman Show, for example, without doing anything? See, you worked, I don't know how long you worked for your show.
Yeah.
You built it up, and now you have a successful little show. How would you feel if I came and got a show for free without doing anything? Let me know.
Yeah, okay. It's a bit of an odd question because how exactly would you do that? I mean, there's kind of two issues. If you're talking about infringing on copyright by creating the David Bagman Show and copying the logo almost identically except you slightly change the name, well, then there might be kind of like a trademark infringement thing based on how confusing it is and that. But if you create a show, even if you call it the David Bagman Show, you're not going to be on 160 radio and TV stations like we are. You're not going to be on DirecTV and Dish Network. You won't have a YouTube channel with 60,000 subscribers. So just having the name won't give you the success. So I'm not totally sure I understand the question. You don't just get the same audience by naming your show. If I were to create the Situation Room with David Blitzer instead of Wolf Blitzer, I don't have CNN's audience just by virtue of naming the show that way. It's a little bit weird. So I'm not totally sure I get the question. Here's one more voicemail. Take a listen to this.
Good morning. This is Gordon from Eugene, Oregon. Thank you for the video on the Me GOP in Maine. It's good that we have you and your other associate as gay commentators, not always on gay issues, but on matters of the day, like what you're talking about now and what needs to be talked about. I really like it from a gay point of view.
Well, listen, I'm thrilled that you like our show as two gay commentators from a gay point of view, but Lewis is not gay and I'm not gay. So there may have been some kind of mixed signal there, or maybe an assumption that was made that isn't true. But I don't know what to say, Lewis. Somebody likes the fact that even though we are gay journalists, sometimes we comment about other stuff. I appreciate the praise. I hope that his view of the show doesn't change, knowing that neither one of us is gay.
Right. That's all I'll say is that I hope he still likes the show.
Absolutely. And of course, I've told the story on the bonus show of where Lewis and I were invited as a couple to go to dinner with another gay couple. And I actually thought it would be great not to tell Lewis and say, hey, we're just going on a business meeting, and let it all kind of reveal itself throughout the dinner. It didn't end up happening. I don't know that I would have been able to pull it off anyway. Leave us your voicemail. 219-2DAVID-P is our voicemail number. Please become a David Pakman Show member. With everything that is going on with corporate media being completely controlled by big corporations, being completely controlled by lobbyists and politicians, our program is funded mostly by individuals like you. DavidPakman.com/membership is how you sign up. Not only do you support the program, not only is it incredibly inexpensive, but you will also get access to lots of great features, including the bonus show, which starts right after this show ends. It's hosted by Lewis. It is produced by Lewis. I play the sidekick on that show. Check it out. We'll be back with a brand new show next week. And excellent bonus show today. I'm telling you, you don't want to miss this one.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.